Howard Blumenthal, and we are doing episode number 36 of Reinventing School. And today the subject is social studies. And I'm not sure I really understood just how broad, deep, wide, and enormous social studies is. So I started making a list of things that are associated with social studies. And of course, the web is helpful in that. So here's what I came up with, and I suspect there's a lot more. We've got geography, world history, national history, regional and local history, political science, transportation, social history, civics, government, international relations, economics, aspects of humanities, anthropology, archaeology, cultural history, aspects of geology, population studies, multicultural studies, heritage, and current events. So, and I'm sure I've left stuff out. Now, there are about 10,000 hours of instruction available in K through 12. And our suspicion, which we'll talk about some, is that social studies broadly gets 10% or even less than 10% of that. Math, science, and language arts get more. So we have this enormous amount of information. And the tough part about social studies is we add things every year, because every time you look at the headlines, suddenly we're talking about impeachment, and we're talking about extremist groups, and we're talking about Black Lives Matter, and we're talking about all these new subjects. So at a certain point, the cupboard is pretty full, and we keep on shoving more stuff in it, which makes it, I think, pretty hard to remember and pretty hard to connect up. So, but I'm not an expert in this, and this is one episode in an arc that we're doing that covers math, social studies, science, and language arts. And then we'll probably also do physical education and health, which gets an even smaller share, but now because of the pandemic, I think is probably a lot more important. So what I'm hoping to do is negotiate with, I guess it's called Education God, saying, all right, we've got 10,000 hours. Can we rejigger this in some way? And that's sort of in the back of my mind, is like, how do you do this in the best possible way, not only in the United States, but around the world? So with that, we have a few guests who know a lot more about this than I do, and I'm thrilled to have you guys with us. So why don't we just do kind of a quick around, just very briefly, who is everybody, and then we'll get into some detail, probably beginning with what I just talked about. So Olivia, tell us about you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Olivia Oliva. I'm currently a junior at Seaman High School in Topeka, Kansas.
Great, thank you. And Ellie, you are where?
I am Ellie Noble, and I am also a junior here at Seaman High in Topeka, Kansas.
Very good. And you guys know each other, right? In fact, you're sneakily in the same library, aren't you? Okay, just wanted to point that out. All right. And you guys, you want to introduce your teacher?
This is Nathan Mcallister. He's our history teacher. He teaches a college history, U.S. history class, which is the class that I'm currently enrolled in.
Great. What year are you guys in, by the way, Ellie and Olivia?
11th grade.
Very good. Thank you. And so, Nate, tell us about you and where you are and all that.
Well, thank you for having me. And as you said, my name is Nathan Mcallister. I teach college U.S. history, a museum studies class, and a American Civil War class here in Topeka, Kansas at Seaman High School. So happy to have Ellie and Olivia with us today. Very passionate students and very passionate about history education and about where history education is headed. So I'm just a history teacher who is really concerned about in student engagement, civics, and history education in general.
Cool. Thank you. Glenn, you have sort of a broad and deep reach in this. You talk to a lot of people who are involved in teaching social studies and learning social studies. Give us a sense of kind of how you came up and where you are and what you do.
Well, first of all, yes, thank you for letting me be a part of the conversation. And Ellie and Olivia, I don't know if you know this, but Nathan is more than just a history teacher. He won't say this. He is a Gilda Lehrman History Teacher of the Year, a National History Teacher of the Year. he's not just a social studies teacher or just a history teacher. So Nathan won't say that, but I will, because I've had the chance to get to know him. As part of what I do, I work as a social studies consultant for an educational service agency in central Kansas. And yes, part of the beauty of what I get to do is to travel around, and at least up until, 11 months ago, travel around and meet and work with lots of really smart people. And so it's been a lot of fun and interesting and challenging, just to work with people like Nathan, to find ways to help people like Ellie and Olivia make the world a better place when they get out of high school. So that's what I do, and that's what I enjoy doing.
And you were a teacher before that, right?
I taught middle school for a long time, and there are times that I really miss middle school, and there are times when, no, I'm done. I don't want to mess with middle school teachers.
I don't miss middle school. Emma, tell us about you.
Thanks, Howard. My name is Emma Humphreys. I'm the Chief Education Officer for iCivics, the EdTech nonprofit founded by retired Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor to reimagine civic learning for all kids in the United States. I'm also the Deputy Director of Civics Now, which is the sort of influence strategy of iCivics, working to enhance social studies and civic education policy in the states and at the federal level as well. And lastly, and most importantly, I too am a member of the Nate Mcallister fan club. He is not just a teacher, he's one of the best. Truly, I know lots and lots of teachers across the country, and easily top 1%. Truly one of the best. Ellie and Olivia, you're so lucky.
Very cool. All right. Well, I intend to learn some things about social studies through this, and I want to be fairly specific. And I'm learning a bit. And we had I don't know, several episodes ago, we had one of the guests we did an episode about school boards, and one of them came from I forget what he was Native American, and we talked a lot about tribal life and reservations and education there. He's in Wyoming, and we've been doing this now for a while. So I uncovered some things because I'm reading a biography of all people, John Quincy Adams, for reasons that I will explain later. And I'm discovering stuff. It's like, I didn't know this. He's like, I didn't know that either. So there's a lot of, I didn't know that in, I would think, and you guys probably are still discovering that. Okay. With that, tell me what I missed when I listed every conceivable thing in social studies. Let's start there, and give me a sense of the breadth and the role of social studies within the overall K-6 environment, middle school environment, and high school environment. So it sounds like any of the grown-ups could jump in and grab that. So
I think you missed psychology. I'm not sure that I heard it, but more importantly, I think you missed news or media literacy, and that's a great example of the field expanding and trying to find more time to cover more topics when the instructional time devoted to social studies is in fact declining. So I think an argument could be made that all of those other topics you listed are difficult to fully grasp and study and understand without knowing how to consume media, how to make sense of the constant bombardment of almost too much information, and apply it to what you know and what you're learning.
So you're adding not only media literacy, you're adding psychology, I heard you say? So
yeah, psychology's been there probably for a while. It's been sort of considered one of the social sciences.
So I'm guessing sociology would be as well.
That's right.
Just so my list gets longer. And I'm guessing the time to teach it gets shorter. Is that about right? Glenn, what's your observation?
Yeah, before we started, Emma was talking about, especially at the elementary level, K-6, and she said an hour a week. I think that's generous in a lot of schools that I get the chance to spend time in or talk with teachers who teach in those sorts of elementary schools where social studies of any kind, whether it's psychology, sociology, or Kansas history or whatever, the amount of time that is intentionally set aside for social studies instruction of any kind is way less than an hour in many places per week. And it's almost always I'm sorry,
go ahead.
It's almost always at the end of the day or the end of the week. So if there's an assembly or a snow day, we have to let out early or whatever, then that's just you just skip it and nobody seems to worry about it. It's not one of those things that is focused on. And I think a lot of that started with the No Child Left Behind Act, 15 years ago or so, where math and reading was truly the focus. And how do we make time for math and reading? We get rid of something else.
So Olivia, Ellie, you guys are most recently in elementary school of this group.
Yeah.
Give us a sense.
I completely agree what you guys are saying. A lot of elementary school, it's dedicated to learning the basics, learning how to read, learning how to divide and multiply, learning how to spell. And truthfully, I don't think I started learning anything about social studies or real history until maybe 5th grade, 6th grade. And the earliest I can remember is maybe like Kansas Day. And that's not truthfully about history. It's more of, what's our state bird? And so, yeah, truthfully,
What's your state bird?
the butterfly is the monarch.
Okay.
Then there's a turtle.
Okay.
So obviously you can see what I learned from Kansas State Elementary Education. But yeah, just what you guys are saying, there's just so much more to go through K through 6th grade. So social studies is definitely pushed to the side.
Okay. So Emma, what's going on here from a policy perspective?
So I won't answer that question, but I want to say, and to Olivia's credit, or in her defense, this is why we're doing such a bad job, is we're just sort of focusing on these very not memorable facts. And it's like, okay, memorize this, regurgitate it on a test, let's move on. We're not spending time in deep inquiry, really teaching kids how to be historians and how to be social scientists. And the result is exactly what you'd expect. I can't name my state birds either, but I know I was taught them at some point, probably in 4th grade. But from a policy perspective, it's a Western medal. I was really hoping you were going to put Nate on the spot and see if he knew what
Nate, did you be honest with us? Did you know it or not?
Oh yeah, I knew that. And
Okay.
It's the ornate box turtle is the state reptile.
Okay. Thank you. So Emma, policy perspective on this.
Yeah, from a policy perspective, what's happening is sort of exactly what is being described here. So No Child Left Behind is certainly one of the most sort of recent policy grabs to look back on and say that's when we started to see a major decline in instructional time for the social studies. But it's actually started way before, and a lot of us in the field like to refer to 1957 to the Russian satellite Sputnik. That sort of freaked out Americans. I mean, you could see it from your front yard. Sort of, I couldn't. I wasn't around. I don't think Ellie or Olivia could see it either. Maybe not Nate. But I won't age anyone else here. But Americans, sorry, Glenn. But Americans could see the satellite, from their yards. It scared them, and thus began a nationwide prioritization and investment in STEM education. This didn't happen overnight. This took decades, but here we are today in 2021, where the federal government spends $50 per student per year on STEM education and only 5 cents per year per student on civic education.
Do those numbers again, because that was dollars versus cents. That wasn't dollars versus dollars. Do that again slowly.
That's right. And folks are sort of incredulous when I say that. It's $50 per year per student on STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math, and only 5 cents per year per student on civics. And that's at the federal level. Obviously, states have their own spending models, but I assure you it doesn't get any better. And we have in this country 9 states that have no civic education requirements. And what's really interesting is you started off the session by explaining just how broad and vast and brilliant the social studies are. And really, if you were to poll Olivia or Ellie or any other student of the American public school system, they'll say, no, it's just history, geography, government. And by government, we're not even getting to civics. We're just talking about that sort of 1 semester of 12th grade American government that's really about institutions and systems and not about the role of the individual. So you've seen this huge sort of reduction of what the social studies are. You've seen a large decline in the instructional time spent, particularly at the elementary level. And you've seen a huge disinvestment, a huge decline in investment. And the easiest way for me to put it is that we spend 13 years from kindergarten to 12th grade teaching these young women, teaching our students to be strong readers and good at math and understand the scientific method. We spend about 1 semester in 12th grade teaching them how to be citizens. It's not enough. And when you consider that the original purpose of our public schools was to cultivate citizenship and prepare people for their roles as citizens in our democratic republic, this is a huge problem.
Wow. Okay. Nate, I got to say, and I guess I'm responding a little bit to what Emma said. When I made the list, I cheated. I actually went to the internet for half of it. So certainly I got the basic stuff, but I didn't get everything. And it was only when I started making that list on our promotional website on www.reinventing.school, I realized I'm still writing here. I've been doing this for a half hour, discovering things. So it's an enormous body of knowledge. I want to kind of remove you from your very specific history role and have you think more in terms, just for this question, about social studies broadly. It's so much stuff. And it sounds like you got about 6 years to teach it, not 12 as I thought, which means you have less than 500 hours, which means if somebody did this for 13 weeks, at best, at 13 weeks, 14 hours, that would be more than you get, right? So, like, if we just did nothing but study social studies from now through the end of April as a job, that's all the social studies education we're getting. How do you pick out what's important, and what Olivia needs and what Ellie needs, and whether those are even the same needs?
Well, I think there's a lot going. There's a lot going into that question.
Yeah,
and I would agree. It's a vast amount of information, and I think and one of the things that when you're mentioning that list, those pieces in there, I think we have to talk about the interconnectedness of all of those pieces,
yeah,
and start talking about, instead of trying to cover every single thing, how do we give Ellie and Olivia and other students the skills with which they can then interact with those topics, understand how those topics are interconnected, and then use those topics to then build their own histories and civic education, rather than trying to cover every single detail. And I would agree completely with Emma, and I know Glenn and I agree on this, that this trivial pursuit model of history just doesn't work.
Well, it certainly doesn't make any sense.
No.
So
Maybe if we're getting ready for Jeopardy, it would be great, but we're getting ready for life, and we need to have the skills necessary to navigate what it is to be a U.S. citizen.
And to vote, yeah. So Ellie or Olivia, jump in. Why are you interested in this? And what parts of it, like what grabs you? Why do you care?
I think it's really important. I feel like a lot of students my age, younger than me, even older than me, we're not really educated. And when we talk about certain subjects, we want to know what we're talking about, but in reality, we really don't. I think that's the lack of education, that like history education that we have been given. I mean, it's like just started this year where I've suddenly been getting into, the issues going around in the US, especially this summer with the past, inconveniences that have been happening. I think I just have been more interested in it. And I realized that I haven't really been educated in many different ways, as we should be. And teens, it's important for us because we are the future of America. And if we're not educated and we have no idea what we're talking about, then we're going to get nowhere. And it's just, yeah.
What are you interested in?
I'm interested in learning more about, my country and how things work.
Be specific. Give me some specific things that are like, I really want to know more about that.
Yeah. So I really want to know more about the government. I feel like I have a decent understanding. I haven't gone through my government class yet, but I have a decent understanding, just like the basics of how everything works, the two parties and how people differ and all of that. But I think it's really fascinating on how we were built on the two-party system. And I think that it's important that all of the students learn about that and not just the semester government class.
Olivia, give us your take on it.
Yeah, I'm pretty similar to Ellie. I haven't taken a government class yet. I'll be taking that next year. But what drew me to being a part of this conversation is lack of representation for other races in the history that we're talking about. Like Ellie said, there's so much that has gone on for people wanting equal rights, and just so much going on this summer concerning race in America. And so I think, like we were saying, how history doesn't really connect. Most of the time, I just feel like I'm being dropped into a subject, and I don't see how that connects to, the wider spectrum of this country and how we're here today. So biggest thing is just the lack of representation of other cultures and other races.
How many students roughly are in your school, Olivia or Ellie?
We have around 3,000, I think it is. Or no, 150.
All right.
1,500, somewhere around there.
Olivia, how many students in your school?
Yeah, I think there's like 300 per class.
Okay.
So a little around the thousands.
Okay, that's fine. Good. Nate, what's the real number?
It's right around 12, 13.
Yeah, okay.
Depending on the year.
That's fine. And remember, we're doing social studies here, not math, so it's okay. So how many of those students, Nate, are you teaching? Or do you teach, like of any group, because it's a rolling average, got 1,200 kids, how many are you touching?
Oh, not many, because my museum studies class is pretty small.
Yeah.
The college U.S. history that I have, it's a college class, so you have to pay. And
yeah.
Really, it's my American Civil War class that's the largest numbers that I have. But I might have 110 students total.
Okay. So do you find, and that's this semester, so so you're getting about a third of the kids? Is that about right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. What about the others? How do they learn? Or are they even in social studies at all? Like, how is this working?
Well, we have a fairly large social studies department in our school, and if they're not in my class, they're in another U.S. history class. Or
so everybody's getting it, but they're only getting it for 4 years. And I'm assuming you do this 5 days a week, or is that a social studies 5 days a week or less? Less.
Well, right now we're about 4 days a week.
Well, but I mean, under fairly normal circumstances.
Oh, yeah. 5 days a week.
5 days a week. Yep. Okay. For how long each time? 45 minutes or something?
No, we're in a block schedule. So yeah, I guess what you're saying. Yeah. No. We're only getting about 2 days a week. That's about it.
Great. Okay. Emma, can you give us a little bit of overview here? What's going on? This is sounding worse and worse with every question.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's 50 different answers because we have a federal system, and so the answers to these questions vary by state, by locality as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, by and large, you can expect that from 6th through 12th grade, kids are going to get sort of one period of social studies
per day.
Well, depending on the kind, if they're on a regular schedule or block schedule, but the idea would be, the vast majority of us are on a regular schedule. We're talking 50 minutes a day of the social studies. So in 6th grade, you might get geography. In 7th grade, you might get world history. 8th grade, American history. Then you get to high school. In 9th grade, you might take geography again or world cultures. And then 10th grade is world history. 11th grade, American history. 12th grade, half a semester of econ and a semester of government. Now, if the kids who are really into it, there are some electives they can pop into,
sure.
but that's it.
And that's actually not that different from the way I remember being educated, Glenn. Similar, pretty much what you had.
Yeah, I with Emma, 4 or 5 hours a week, middle school and high school, into some sort of social studies, if they're taking social studies in Kansas. And I don't think we're that different. You take a year of American history, a semester of government, so probably the high school, some world history thrown in there. So 2.5 to 3 credits.
Right.
That's right.
Of required for graduation. Different school districts at the local level could require more. So I could be a 9th or a 10th grader and not have any social studies because it's not required for graduation. And so again, I don't know, Ellie and Olivia, you can jump in here as well, but you're not required, at least in the state of Kansas. And I don't think really, Emma, correct, you're more national. I don't know of any state who requires more than maybe 3 or 4 credits. If you're requiring 4 credits to graduate from high school of social studies, that's the exception. So yeah, 4 or 5 hours maybe per week if you are actually enrolled in a course, which not every kid is.
Okay.
And there's
Emma?
another problem, Howard, in that even if the kids are getting sort of equal amount of time in these courses as they are in, say, math and science and English, the emphasis and the pressure isn't there. They're not as high stakes. So the kids have to pass, I mean, for graduation in the vast majority of states, you have to pass English, language arts, and math assessments, oftentimes science as well. That's not the case for the social studies. So unless the student is taking an advanced placement course or a Cambridge course where there's a sort of a high stakes for them at an individual level, and these are your more motivated students anyways, unless they're taking those courses, the teachers aren't sort of under the pressure of preparing kids for a test. And so when the administration, it's picture day or club day, or there needs to be an assembly or a pep rally, yeah, you want to pull those kids out of social studies because you're not worried about the test scores at the end of the year.
Nate, if you gave a U.S. citizenship test to the kids who are currently in high school classes, what do you think would happen? Apart from the fact that the parents would stop you, but taking that out of it for a minute.
Well, it's a rather odd question that you would ask, Howard, because the state of Kansas is actually debating making that a law that our students pass a citizenship test before they can graduate high school.
Okay. How many could pass now, do you think?
Those that are in government class right now, probably, I mean, if they're in it right now, I would hope they could all pass it. But
okay.
I would guess that you're going to get a fair amount of students that are, if we're talking about the immigration citizenship test, they're probably going to do okay, but it's not going to be great.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think longitudinally, that's been the case for a number of decades, that when we look back at how social studies education is performed. So
one of the things that I really like about social studies, that confuses me about social studies, talking about math last week, the interesting thing about math is you can actually get to an answer. The interesting thing about social studies is you can't. There's sort of nothing, like one of my favorite old, like slightly tricky question, right, is how do you measure a coastline? Do you know the answer? Is this a familiar question? So can any of you answer it?
In Kansas, it's easy.
Okay. But
that's like here's the National Teacher of the Year right there.
So here's the deal. The answer is you can't. And the reason you can't has to do with fractal geometry, because the closer you look, the more you realize just how many curves. So you can't, if you go to a coastline, it's not one line, right? It's a bunch of different curves and right. So what's wonderful about all of this is it's not quite opinion, but it's not quite fact either, aside from when there's a law, and even laws are open to interpretation. So it's very difficult to actually pin something within this world. Scientists believe, and scientists pretend they have answers, but in fact they have assumptions, and those assumptions are sometimes overturned. So on a subjective spectrum, from math being, that's the answer, social studies is probably way on the other end. And I don't even know where you put language arts, because everything is open for interpretation, right? So if you're kind of looking at it that way, as I mentioned before, I'm reading a John Quincy Adams biography. And I'm very intentionally, I started with Ron Chernow, who wrote the Hamilton book on which the musical is based. And I started with a really good Ron Chernow, really fat Washington biography. And I'm going to read every, or just about every, presidential biography in order, because it's something I've always wanted to do, and off we go. So John Adams. Do you know much about John Adams? Anyone? Anybody?
John Adams or John Quincy Adams?
John Quincy Adams, JQA, sorry. He's like,
he's the son of John Adams.
Yeah, like not a lot, right? You guys, Ellie, Olivia? All right. So here's the deal. Daddy, before he became president, was a diplomat. He was the one who negotiated, early treaties and all that with England. Now, the key here is he brought his son along. And his son wrote a diary from the time he was about 14 years old. So we actually know more about John Quincy Adams than just about any other president, including his boyhood years. He's also enormously smart, and wanted to be a poet, and is actually quite a talented poet from the poetry that I'm reading in the book. It's like, okay, that's interesting. Where are we going with this, right? So as I've been reading, it's like, okay, he was trained as a diplomat. So he was sort of the natural choice to send to Russia, to send to France, to send to all these different places. So you're reading these names like, wow, this guy hung out with these people, and they're, these big bold-faced names from history, from European history. And then you begin to realize, wait, so he's trying to navigate a way to keep his country, a new country, alive. He's trying to make sure we don't all get killed. That's useful. That's helpful. Thank you, John, right? So, or John Quincy. But when you get to the part about the British and the French and the Russians and the Spaniards, you realize how this is sort of a game of, you'll excuse me, 12-year-old girls who are just like fighting with each other all the time. And everybody's telling secrets. Everybody's gossiping. It's like a little social media circle. And if this one is friendly, then this one's your enemy. And if this one's your friend, then this one's your enemy. So what happened apparently, and I just learned this, so I'm hoping that the social studies minds here will help me, is that the British, when they lost the colonies, they teamed up with the Indians and decided they were going to try to wreck our government. So the British provided funds and guns and all this other stuff. The problem was, as soon as the British made up with the French, if I have the story right, they're like, yeah, we don't have to do this anymore. Bye. So that left the Indians completely without protection, which opened up the colonists' ability to be able to take their land. Now, if you take this from a British point of view or a French point of view or a Native American point of view, they're like totally different stories. Just as a group of 12-year-old girls telling you, well, this is what happened, definitely. It's like, there's not a chance all of you are going to agree. I'm making fun of 12-year-old girls, but Ellie or Olivia, am I close? Yeah. All right. So, Nate, you probably know more about this than I do. I don't even know if I've got the story right, but the idea that you've got to tell the story from 5 different perspectives and still not understand it makes okay, let's teach social studies even more complicated. Am I on the right track here?
No, you're exactly, that's exactly it. And that's part of the complexity, but that's also part of the beauty of social studies, because it's a human story. And I'm all the time telling my students, people are people. And because of that, things are going to be complicated. Things are going to be messy. It's never going to be clearly this way or that way. And you brought up that piece about the British and supplying Native Americans with guns and other materials, and how helping them stay in forts out in what would be back then the western part of the United States, which then connects,
which is more like Ohio, right?
Yeah.
It's not even Kansas,
right? Okay. No, we're not that far west, not yet. Mm-hmm. And so then that connects to to Tecumseh and the Pan American Indian Alliance that comes out pre-War of 1812, because there is this push by Native Americans to then come together as one group to hold back the United States from moving west. So there's all these stories mixed in, and typically the narrative has been the colonies are there, the colonies gain independence, and then they move west, and then the Native Americans are just pushed out of the way. But there's so much more going on, because, as you said, the British and the French, and even down south, in Emma's neck of the woods, you have the Spanish involved in doing the same thing. So all of these countries, there's these, as you likened it to teenagers, there's these backstabbing and infighting and back and forth diplomatic pressures on one group to the next. And oftentimes those groups that are marginalized are the ones caught in the middle, and we tend to not talk about them at all. And we're talking about just the geopolitical situation between countries. And we're not talking about those individuals and those groups that are caught in the middle, so to speak.
This is so complicated. Ellie, Olivia, why do you like this?
There's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. But I just think, you know, there's so much history, like we were talking earlier, the list goes on of different types. And so I think, as boring as it seems, you're really never going to get bored with the amount of history things you can learn.
Ellie, what do you think?
Yeah,
Unmute.
I completely agree. I mean, I think that having a good teacher has a big part of that, you know, someone that can explain it well, like Mr. Mcallister does a great job. But there is a lot to learn. And I mean, I know I have a lot to learn too. And even, you know, Mr. Mcallister, I'm sure Glenn and Emma still have much to learn. And yeah, it's just fascinating.
So you can simplify it, right? You can gamify it, and we'll talk about that in a minute, Emma. You can try to find some essences. I've been reading about this sort of avidly now because I wasn't a history major, I was an English major for like 20 years or longer. And I feel like I'm just beginning to like, oh, and then somebody throws me some other thing. And I'm like, all right, I don't understand this at all now. Right. So I was in Manchester, England, and they were talking about the American South and getting cotton from India instead of the American South when they realized there were unrest. I'm like, this is 3 years ago. It's like, I never knew that. So, and I think I had a reasonable education. And as I say, I've been reading as much as I can, but I feel like I'll never get anywhere near understanding this. So if I'm a high school kid who's not that interested in it, where does that leave me, Glenn?
I was going to just jump in there. I think that's why Ellie and Olivia are interested in this. Olivia said earlier, we need to tell stories of all the different groups of people, all the different perspective, all the different races, all the different countries. I mean, when you started Spain, Russia, France, England, the indigenous nations in what was then the Western United States, those are the stories that we need to let our kids know about.
How?
When we talk to students, use one word to describe high school. It's
boring.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. You know this. We need to reinvent social studies and start telling these stories and letting students explore the same sorts of stories that you're exploring now, 20 or 30 years later. We need to have kids get sucked into these stories.
But when are you going to do that? You have like an hour and a half in all of high school to teach social studies. Like what?
But Emma, we still can do better than what we're doing. I still think it's really easy for a teacher just to say, here, read this, do this worksheet, fill out this stuff, take a quiz, and we'll come up with some new stuff next week for you to remember. And we just need to back off and say, we're not going to cover all this. I still, and Nathan and Emma jump in, but teachers will say, well, tell me what I'm supposed to teach. Tell me what I'm supposed to cover. And I say, cover the fun stuff. It's all fun. It's all interesting. But don't try to do all of it. You can't. And you're exactly right, Howard. We don't have enough time. So let's pick some of the stories and let kids begin to explore all the nuances that Nathan was talking about, because that's when it's fun. That's when it's like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me?
So
really?
And Howard,
yeah.
Fun.
And Howard, I would just to piggyback off what Glenn is saying, I think one of the things, and Glenn and I have talked at length about this and probably had some knockdown, drag out fights about this. It's we need to let these students drive part of what they are learning. And a great example of is Ellie did this project on Edmonia Lewis. I had never, I'm learning from her.
Never heard of her. Stop there, Ellie. Tell us, because we're all looking at this going, we should probably know this.
Yeah, so I'm competing in the National History Day competition this year, and my project that I decided to do is over a sculptor in the 1800s. Her name is Edmonia Lewis. She is an African-American, Native American sculptress. She's known for creating like busts of abolitionists during the Civil War. She made one of Abraham Lincoln, and she's just really amazing and incredible, and her story is inspiring.
How did you find out about this person that none of us know about?
Yeah, so when I was researching topics, I was really, the main thing I was looking for is I want to do a woman. I want to do somebody, who's not a male, who's important. It would be even better if she was a woman of color. And her name was kind of down beneath all these famous people. And I was like, her name is interesting. Let's look her up. And she was a woman of color. And I was like, that's even better. And so let's go from there.
You found it yourself.
Yes.
Okay. I want to talk more about that, but you found it yourself. Is this supposed to be a curriculum? So I'm involved with the positive psychology folks at the University of Pennsylvania. And the question I keep asking is this a course to have well-being as part of school, or is it a culture and you nurture the culture? This is feeling less to me like a subject and more to me like a student's personal interest that we need to fan, but we're all voting in the same election. So on the one hand, I do want you to learn about that and I want to learn from you. On the other, there's a commonality that we need to share. So Emma, some overview here?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. We want the course, we want the instructional time. I'm less concerned with the canon and getting through it all because Howard, as you're demonstrating, we could all live our entire lives and never get through it all and continue to learn. And that's sort of the point, and that's what we want to cultivate. And these skills that Nate is teaching to his students, it's how to think like historians, how to ask questions, how to research, how to find evidence, and how to tell a compelling story or make a compelling argument. That's ultimately what we want. Yeah, we need them to know some things, right? We know the sort of the E.D. Hirsch argument. There's some cultural knowledge we need folks to know. We know that kids are stronger readers if they have more time in social studies and therefore have the content knowledge to make sense of what they're reading. So we need all these things. And we also need school cultures that promote well-being and social emotional learning and democratic citizenship. It's sort of silly to teach kids how to be citizens in buildings and institutions that are run undemocratically. And in some cases, folks would compare them to prisons, right? So we have a lot of work to do. That's why I love the name of your podcast, right? It's not just reinventing the curriculum or pedagogy or textbooks, it's school in general. We need to do a better job. But when we get in the classroom, when we get that social studies time, we get that instructional time, we need to tell that more complete history. We do need to have a shared understanding, a shared story of America, but it needs to be a shared story that has multiple perspectives. I want my students to love America and to love their country, but also know the plethora of ways in which we've fallen short of reaching our highest ideals. And, we love our culture wars. We love to duke it out. And it's either, we're patriotic education or you're teaching kids to hate America. No, neither. Every teacher, like Nate, wants to do the right thing. And they want critical students who are critical thinkers and yes, love their country, but also want and know how to fight to make her better.
But you don't have enough time. So here's an idea. You guys study wars and stuff, right? That's part of social studies, yes? So I don't think the math people do. So if social studies declared war on math, you might be able to gain some territory. That works, right? Glenn, what do you think?
I'm all for that. Absolutely. We have a sort of a joke running around in our office if we could start our own school. And we talk about that quite often, and your name and Steve's comes up as part of those conversations. We would do social studies and science. That's it. Every book is a social studies book. Every video game is a social studies video game. I can teach science and math and language arts and social studies by focusing on social studies, all that vastness of stuff that you listed off at the beginning.
So is that a suggestion? I guess this is an Ellie Olivia question first. Is that a suggestion that the idea of having math class, because they made that argument last week, we should fully integrate, or should there be some other organization that allows you to move from one place to another? Question one. Question two, do you want to find your own way, or do you want teachers to teach you? Because I think there may be more value in learning than in teaching. And let's debate that a little bit. So Ellie and Olivia, and then we actually have a teacher here, so we'll see what he thinks, or a couple.
I'm actually going to start off with question two. I think that It's really important for students to find their own way and learn. And I think that's the way I learn the best, you know. But we've been trained ever since we were young to listen to the teacher, do instructions, follow everything correctly, you know, be like Miss Perfect. So then it's hard when we grow up to have our own opinions, and because we, you know, we just want to base it off of what other people are saying all the time and what my teacher is saying or what my parents are saying. And so I think it's really important for students to take their own way and be creative and learn, and that's really how you do learn in the end.
Olivia.
Yeah, just going off of what Ellie's saying, I do think some type of structure is important. I don't think it should be completely driven by the students. I do think it's a good creative outlook if they do. But like we were saying, once you get out into the real world, it's not, you know, it's not structured like high school is. You don't have these huge due dates like we do in high school. And so I do think it's important to figure out how can we be flexible enough to show them, you know, it's going to be different, and how to accommodate these people's interests to make them actually engaged in what they're learning.
Nate.
Well, I tend to agree and disagree with both of my students. I do agree that there needs to be some structure. I mean, because I'm always right. Uh, no, I think it's important to have that structure, but at the same time, I think that the students need to have that flexibility. I would agree with them wholeheartedly on that. But I think I'm also in agreement with Glenn that I think history should be driving what is going on in the school. I think we should be the subject that everybody then bases everything else off of. But I think as far as the structure of school, I think we should maybe get rid of the notion that we're going to try to cover everything, and let's figure out, have more maybe a cafe style for students to then find their interest in how they're going to learn history, and like Ellie, and learn those skills along the way, and then teach others, and have and I guess that's where the students need to be driving, not necessarily driving the entire education, but driving certainly their interest and learning through that, and the teachers as guides, not necessarily I'm the sage on the stage and I'm going to give you all this knowledge and then you're going to regurgitate it back to me in some form. It needs to be a partnership of sorts.
Glenn.
Yeah, one of the things that we're trying to do in Kansas is literally to redesign schools. We're trying to figure out ways to help schools create that cafeteria buffet that Nathan was talking about in terms of competencies. These are the things that an engaged, knowledgeable, informed citizen and democracy needs to be successful and to make the world a better place. And that's difficult because it does put a lot of those choices in the hands of students to make decisions about what they learn. I love Ellie talking about Lewis and, you know, and her work that she did in the 1800s. And that's what's going to motivate her. That's still history. That's still language arts. That's still science. That's still all of the things that we want kids to do. But it's her choice, and it's part of that buffet that Nathan will go check, 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 check. Yes, that's the canon that Emma was talking about earlier. We can find ways to ensure that we all have that same story as we leave high school. But I think we need to really move away from the idea of saying you got to go to math class, bell rings. Now you got to go to language arts class, bell rings. Now you got to go here, bell rings. And let kids, especially high school students, start to make some of these choices for themselves and say, yes, I'm competent in this, I'm competent in this, and I can check these boxes off, and I am able to go out into the world and do good because I have these skills and this knowledge.
At this age, because I think you get wiser and stupider as you get older, or at least you realize what you don't know. I'm not even sure that I have the necessary skills or competencies anymore. I think I felt much more strongly that I had it earlier, and now the more I learn, the less I know. Emma, help.
Well, it used to be that you could turn on the evening news and trust what you were hearing, no matter which of the 4 stations you were on, or you could pick up the newspaper and know that what was printed was the news and not everything else. So it's a problem we have. I'm not going to blame everything on the internet. I'm not going to blame everything on the proliferation of information.
I'm going to blame Olivia. Just
clean cut, that no explanation.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. Yeah, that works. And I have a couple of daughters. I typically blame the 4-year-old, and that's typically the right thing to do because she's guilty. But I notice in social media habits and behaviors, it's actually not the young people sharing misinformation because young people know, like, I'm not going to trust what I see just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. Where their parents or grandparents, they grew up believing that if it was printed, then it was bona fide, it was verifiable. So I think that's one reason. But I think you have a set of skills, and this isn't a Liam Neeson joke, but you have an ability to look at information, make sense of information, and figure things out. And that's sort of what school is about. It's not about this subject or that subject. And when we get to college, students are so obsessed with their major, and parents get upset, like, you're going to major in English? What are you going to do with an English degree? As if college is job training, as if school is job training. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be, right? I'm like, major in something you're passionate about, you'll do well, you'll get good grades, and then you'll go to graduate school or get a job. And we should treat high schoolers and middle schoolers and even elementary school kids that way. Study things that are important to you, that matter to you. Learn stories that are relevant to you and your identity and your lived experiences. You're gonna do better. You're gonna learn more, and you're gonna perform better.
We could go on for a very long time, but our bell is ringing, as Glenn was saying. So what I'd love to do is run the credits, and then if everybody can hang out for just a few minutes, we can wrap this up among ourselves, because we have a lot of ideas that we all are sharing. So thank you, everybody, very much for participating in this. This was easily one of my favorite episodes. So thank you for making that possible. But so next week, we're going to do the same thing with science. And then after that, we may swing back around to social studies and all the other subjects, because this is just so interesting, and I feel like it's just not discussed often enough. So we are providing that forum. I'm thrilled to be a part of it. Thank you all very much again. We'll see everybody next week. For on-demand episodes and more, visit our website. Kids on Earth contains hundreds of video interviews with students from around the world. Learning Revolution is a global collaboration network for people who care about learning. Be sure to join us next Thursday for a new episode of Reinventing School. Thanks for watching.